The forest is so dense and thickly packed with trees that navigating it feels like trying to traverse a maze. You have no idea how long you've been trapped in this confusing woodland. So little sunlight gets through the branches, it's hard to keep track. One thing you do know, however, is that you're not alone. Something has been following you, a great bull-headed beast that continues to stalk you no matter how hard you try to elude it. You're sore and tired, yet the hulking brute has not relented, and while you catch your breath for just a moment, the Minotaur creeps so close that you can hear the angry breaths escaping its nostrils and the beat of its hoofs slowly getting closer. Hello, I'm Conan of Kogo's Homebrew, and welcome to From Mythos to Monsters, the series where I take fantasy's most beloved creatures by the horns and ride through history to see where they came from. Assuming I don't fall off, of course. Before we begin today's episode, I'd like to quickly announce that I'm now posting these podcasts as blogs, meaning there's now a written version of each episode for those of you who might prefer reading to watching videos. Now, let's go back into ancient times and find out exactly what has been prowling in this labyrinth. The Minotaur was a creature of ancient Greek mythology which had the head of a bull and the body of a human being. While our modern understanding of the Minotaur is as a species of monster, the creature of Greek myth was actually one of a kind. In case you don't know the legend of the Minotaur already, let's quickly go over it. The word Minotaur translates to Bull of Minos. Now, Minos was a king who was given a bull by Poseidon, god of the sea, to sacrifice. However, after Minos refused to kill the bull, Poseidon punished him by making Minos' wife fall in love with the bull, and after some off-screen fun, she gave birth to the Minotaur. It's a real dick move, Poseidon. Minos then imprisoned the Minotaur in a labyrinth, which was a confusing maze built for the king by Daedalus, the father of Icarus. Minos then started sending 9 Athenians into the labyrinth every 9 years, because Athenians had previously killed his other son, Androgeos. The third time this happened, an Athenian named Theseus volunteered to enter the labyrinth and was able to finally slay the Minotaur. After this, the legend didn't really develop until during the early Middle Ages, when the notion of minotaurs as a species of monster arose with the cosmography of Aphicus Ister, a 7th or 8th century text describing the Amazonian people raising minotaur cubs for use in war. To be fair, this text was known to be a less than reputable source of information, even featuring a flat map of the world. Mind you, there's people today that would still count that as reliable. At this time, all the way until the Renaissance, the most widely available account of the legend of the Minotaur described it as simply a half-bull and half-man, which led to the creature often being wrongly depicted more like a centaur rather than the bull-headed monster it was originally supposed to be. For centuries later, the Minotaur would continue to commonly appear in art and literature. For example, it briefly appears in the 14th century epic Dante's Inferno, where it guards the entrance to the 7th circle of hell. Dante's guide, Virgil, taunts the creature by reminding it about how it was totally fucked up by Theseus all those years ago, which distracted it for long enough to enable the two of them to proceed. In the 20th century, the Minotaur also briefly became associated with the Spanish painter Pablo Picasso. Now, while Picasso was undeniably a hugely influential artist, he was also a creepy bastard who was not nice to women. Rather than reflect on his misogyny, he blamed it on the beast he said lurked inside of him, and used the Minotaur as an avatar for which to depict this beast in his artwork. He found the Minotaur to be an evocative symbol for this monstrous side of himself because he was raised in an area of Spain that was known for its bullfighting. Now, before we go on to explore the Minotaur in modern fantasy, I want to spend a moment talking about the demon Baphomet. That might seem random, but his legend actually becomes intertwined with the Minotaur's depiction in fantasy. The name Baphomet emerged in the 14th century after the Knights Templar were accused of demon worship. The knights were tortured into making forced confessions by the church, describing how they were seduced by Muslims into worshipping an idol of a demon named Baphomet. This wasn't even a real demon, by the way. The first record of the name ever appearing was during this Inquisition, and was almost certainly just a corruption of the name Muhammad, or perhaps the word Mamet, the Arabic word for false idol. Our idea of Baphomet today came from artwork produced in 1856 by Eliphas Levi, which depicted him as an androgynous winged goat. That's two evil monsters which are both part human and part farm animal. You might be able to see where this is going. In the early 20th century, we began to see the idea of a Minotaur as a fantastical species of creature rather than a single monster. One of the most famous examples is in the Chronicles of Narnia book series, which features a race of evil Minotaurs who serve as soldiers to the antagonistic White Witch. Well, eventually we get to 1977 with the rise of Dungeons & Dragons and the release of the first edition Monster Manual, which for the first time ever featured the Minotaur as a monster. In older editions of the game, Minotaurs were rare and incredibly powerful monsters created either through curses placed on humans or through other Minotaurs breeding. Unlike real bulls, they were carnivores who needed to hunt to eat, and to do this they used heightened senses that allowed them to track their prey with uncanny accuracy, even through mazes. Once they finally caught up to their quarry, they would charge it down with their horns and gore them for severe damage. However, while their abilities largely remained the same for future editions of the game, the Minotaur would gradually become a weaker and less rare monster, designed for lower level parties to fight as a boss, or for higher level parties to fight as a horde enemy that would attack them in threatening herds. In terms of their lore in D&D, Minotaurs lived in dungeons or thick forests, or sometimes in massive underground labyrinths, just like in their original legend. In the setting of Faerun, one such place is simply known as the Labyrinth. It's a massive maze of lava tunnels deep beneath the earth, originally created by a cult of evil dwarfs who worshipped a demon named, guess who? Baphomet. You see, in 1982, D&D introduced its own version of Baphomet, the demon I mentioned earlier who the Knights Templar were supposedly worshipping. In the game, he was the demon lord of beasts who represented the brutal and savage behaviour of animals. Taking inspiration from the image of the demon popularised by Eliphas Levi, D&D's version of Baphomet was also an anthropomorphic creature. However, rather than being a goat, in the game he was depicted as a hulking minotaur, and fittingly, the realm of the underworld he ruled over was known as the Endless Maze. We're not really sure why the developers of D&D chose to intertwine the legend of Baphomet with the story of the Minotaur, aside from the fact that they both look like they belong in a really fucked up farm together. Regardless, in the game's lore, Baphomet is said to have created Minotaurs, and while not all Minotaurs worship him, those that did would wreak brutal havoc in his name. In 3rd edition, there was even a type of Minotaur called a Baphotaur, created through magical experimentation using demon's blood. These Baphotors were, as the name suggests, more closely connected to Baphomet than other Minotaurs, and were also said to prowl the tunnels of the labyrinth. However, they never appeared again after this edition. The blood that was said to have been used to create Baphotors came from a type of demon called a Goristro, a creature unique to D&D, which was most likely also inspired by the myth of the Minotaur due to its close resemblance to them. In fact, while nowadays they look somewhat different to Minotaurs, in 3rd edition the Goristro was just straight up depicted as a colossal anthropomorphic bull. So, as storytellers, what should we take away from this maze of interconnected myths and fables about the Minotaur? Well, I personally believe that the idea in fantasy of the Minotaur as a semi-intelligent race of creatures doesn't do justice at all to the legend that inspired it. What's more, the idea of it being a creature that is good at mazes is just a poor interpretation of its abilities, since the original Minotaur was just as trapped in the labyrinth as its victims were. In fact, while it may be completely baseless from a mythological perspective, D&D's ideas of creatures like the Baphotor and Goristro are, in my opinion, actually much more faithful to the idea of the Minotaur than the game's actual Minotaurs. That's because, unlike actual Minotaurs, these monsters are not described as civilized. They are rare, terrifying, dangerous beings that can't be reasoned with, and who were brought into existence from terrible occult forces beyond our reality, much like the Minotaur himself was in the original legend. So, in your world, I'd suggest your Minotaur be a monster in the truest sense of the word, something unknowable, powerful, and terrifying. Alright, we finally found our way out of the labyrinth and we can bring this episode to a close. Please remember to check out my Patreon if you want to see the stuff I make for D&D, and please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because it really does help a lot. Alright, take care.